OSU Microgrids.
So we were contacted a little while back on how Oregon State University is starting to conduct research into microgrids, microgrid control platforms through their electrical engineering program, I believe, and how they're actually right now, I believe it's up and running today, as they have a test lab that they're currently conducting microgrid experiments with. One of the challenges is that they see is there are not a lot of resources around microgrids in that particular area. So they've actually invited us to go over and check out their facility or check out their test lab, which I need to follow up and do that. I have not had a chance to do that yet. But OSU in itself, if you look at the history, I believe you can probably look this up, is that they have a power quality issue, an outage issue at OSU. I believe a couple of years back they had a situation where the power went out and all the servers went down, everything, and they lost a ton of work, like millions of dollars of worth of research and work, essentially. And so, I believe that campuses, and I always believe campuses are great places for microgrid applications. I mean, I can go on numerous cases of different applications where microgrids make sense, but in OSU, it makes a lot of sense because of, first of all, the school, the environment, the grid, resiliency, reliability. When you have storms, knocks out power, it has a significant economic impact. So when people think about microgrids, they think about the technical aspect of cost of power, cost of equipment, software deployment, management of that. So that's really a physical, technical aspect of a microgrid. What people tend to not understand the value add proposition is that what about economic development opportunities? How does it better your community so you attract businesses to be there so that you have a higher quality of power or your renewable power now? Also, that's about educational opportunities, which we're working on with other communities, other tribes, and the projects I'm doing right now. Those are my two big focuses. Reliability of power is really hugely important. In a lot of cases, microgrids, people are willing to pay more for the power, knowing that they're contributing back to society by purchasing and using renewable power, true renewable power, not greenwash renewable power. And that's really important for society, especially here in the West Coast. The East Coast, we don't care so much. So I think another part of it, microgrid, is you have to consider, like, where is it at? What are the benefits, the value adds? Every project has different levers you're going to want to pull, which means essentially pain points. Some people say, well, cost of power is really high, and reliability. Those are important topics. Whereas other people say, well, cost is not the biggest issue for me, but I want to know that my facility is running on green renewable power, and I have my own capacity to island myself in the event of a power outage, which is a popular topic here in Oregon, Washington, California, because of the Cascadia effect, right? This big earthquake that's coming down.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to communities? And I'm from Depot Bay, I'm a coast guy, and so I know for a fact that if we have Cascadia effect, all those coastal communities will essentially be isolated. They will not get any resources or power redirected to them to support them, and they could be out of power for 6 months or more, because the priority the state of Oregon has for their energy action plan in the event of emergency is you prioritize high concentration communities like Portland, Salem, and Eugene. So the other areas won't get priority power when it comes up, and the resources will be deployed at those areas first, and then everything else gets spread out over time. And as you know, coastal communities have a lot of elderly people. And so these people, if they don't have power, they can't access their meds, they can't get gas for the car to drive to get to a safer location. There's loss of life factor that you have to consider in these situations when you have no power. So that's kind of why, I kind of went on a long tangent, but from OSU's perspective, it's about safety of students, safety of faculty, and then again, preserving the work and making sure that all your servers and computers and critical infrastructure is up and running at all times. And that's hugely important. So again, you talk about that application versus like a nursing home, different value add propositions, right? Different topics of discussion, different pain points. And I can almost, you can probably throw me any kind of project you can imagine, and I can tell you some of the high level points of discussion that will automatically innately be there because people want to talk, and no one wants to talk about microgrid because it's cool. They don't talk about microgrid because of economics, or because of energy resiliency, or because of an overall goal within their business model and their mission. So hopefully it kind of gives you a little bit of a couple of top things to spin off
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah, so what do you think are, they don't want to talk about it because it's cool, but more what's the biggest resistance that you, in engaging people with this educational information, what do you experience in resistance?
Well, I think there's different levels of resistance. The basic premise of the first level of resistance is, I'm an oil and gas guy. I don't care about renewable energy. When that topic comes up, the only topic I can bring up at that point is say, well, economic factors. Let's run an economic analysis. Let me show you the financial feasibility and the financial value of a microgrid compared to what you're doing. And it's funny because even last couple of days ago, the Coal Museum in Kentucky put solar panels on their roof to power their own facility. So
The coal.
So there's irony there, right? So the point being is that, that's level one. The other level is that people don't necessarily have really a resistance. They have a reluctance because they deem microgrids as a new technology. And sometimes they don't want to be a guinea pig, or they don't want to be the first in, or they don't understand it. So there's a steep learning curve that involves in that. If they're interested in going through that learning curve process through us, I'm more than happy to hold their hand for as long as it takes, because our goal, what we do and the work we do, is not about doing a microgrid to make a ton of money. Our goal is to do a microgrid to show people that you can live off renewable energy, and the technology is here today, the economics make sense, everybody needs it. And the more the microgrid is deployed, it's better for everybody. It's not about a monetary aspect. If it's about money, I honestly wouldn't be doing this in Oregon. Oregon is probably one of the most difficult places to do a microgrid because of the fact that the power here is so cheap. But the society acceptance of renewable energy, and this is society demand saying, I want to be able to live off the grid, or I want to be able to do this, it's very high here. East Coast, they could care less, but West Coast is strong. So if I can grow a business here using microgrids in a very accepting society like Oregon, but the finances don't make sense, but I'm still willing to go through the work, and I have projects that probably will barely pencil, or they will not be very profitable. For me, that is perfectly okay, because the fact of knowing that part of the movement, part of the trend of evolving our electrical grid system to the next level using renewables rather than polluting our environment is the biggest key for me, because future generations will continue to evolve this model of renewables and understand the importance of renewables, so we can start to step away from destroying our own planet. I think that's going to be a huge key in the work that we do, and that's really why. And I love Eugene. I love Oregon. It's my home. I'm a true Oregonian, born and raised here. And I also just know well enough that it's possible. And really, that's why, especially in the Northwest, I get referred to a lot of business, because I'm kind of like one of the gurus who kind of blazing that early trail in the microgrids here, and people don't understand how to do them, the value added to it, don't know how to design. There's a lot of things they don't know how to do. So that's kind of, I mean, that's the next level of reluctance. We're talking about barrier is people want to take time to learn it, to understand it, and then to adopt it. As far as, and in some cases, the projects may not pencil very well, but in most cases, they will. And so that would be the only other barrier. But that's from a client interaction and user standpoint. The other big barrier that is being pushed somewhat, I think is still slow, and now with new administration, it's going to be, it won't be pushed backwards per se, but stalls, is that we need to have more public-private partnership. We need to have cities and states and utilities adopting the idea and accepting the evolution of our current grid. I mean, the grid's 100 years old. There are substations out there that probably are still 70, 80 years old, up and running with some very old technology on that, which are easily hackable. And I can tell you today, cybercrime to the grid happens on a daily basis. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when will the grid go down. You could probably target between 9 to 12 substations across the United States. If you hit them simultaneously, you can have a cascading effect, which the entire US grid could collapse. And it would take months to come back online. It's a very real threat. And this happened, a good example of this was that Russia did that with Ukraine. If you remember the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia actually dropped their entire power grid before they started even invaded. That was their first step. So this is not some conspiracy theory or some out of whack concept. And if you look into and research it more, there are a variety of cases. Even the U.S. U.S. government has issued statements about the grid being very vulnerable and being dropped. That's really why I'm so passionate about the work that we're doing, because we're an open source platform. So we can avoid viruses, and the vulnerability of being hacked is very small. I mean, for example, this building that we're in today, we could have a microgrid in this building, for example. The chances of anyone wanting to target City of Eugene Library to drop their power structure is very unlikely, unless you really hate the City of Eugene Library, right? I mean, so the chances of you being dropped through power through a cyber attack are very small, but they want to drop an entire economy. So that's where the economic impact really is, and that's where the exposure is. In a microgrid, I mean, no one's really going to bother you, right? And then also you're not susceptible to storms or cars hitting telephone poles or whatever other issues might be. But I think it's just important that I kind of said this before is that we have to be able to understand that we all have evolved. We have all evolved. We constantly evolve. I mean, one of the greatest evolutions was the hammer, for an example. We go from caveman tools to the tools that we have today. We went from bows and arrows to firearms today. My analogy that I use a lot is like the telephone industry. During the bell days, everyone was using a landline. We would walk to a desk or somewhere in our home or payphone and phone and call our friends or our parents, where it may be. But today we don't have that. We have cell phones. I mean, we should in our pocket. We can call someone right away instantaneously. That's instant gratification. But when the telephone days, people said cell phones would never work. It doesn't make sense. There's no infrastructure for that. There's no support behind it. Financially, they're too expensive. They're too clunky. But you look at where we're at today. I assure you, my cell phone is probably more powerful than my laptop was 5 years ago. Right? So people have to understand is that a microgrid is essentially an on-site demand generation of energy using renewable resources. Essentially, it's instant gratification for power. And one is more safer, reliable, and cleaner. And essentially, as we start to do pockets, so we're doing Eugene Library today, but what about the next block over, the next block over? We start to do a series of them to serve people's needs, or house by house, which is already starting to happen. People will start to become more independent and start to get their own gratification that way, and the current grid system will change.
Excuse me.
No worries. Do what you need to do, my friend.
Yeah, there's a book called Cascadia's Fall, and they really go into the grid collapse on that.
Well, everyone, a lot of people in here, they focus more on doing it on the cheap, like trying to save money and is it really going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And I don't really ever rely on the Cascadia as part of my story when I tell it. Talk about microgrids, but I just say that in the event that the grid goes down from any natural disaster, not any natural disaster, but that's what any natural disaster, there's a good chance that you'll still be up and running. And so how does that affect your business operations from a money standpoint? The reality of it is that a lot of it has to do with creating better economics and how those economics could be affected by not using renewable energy or microgrids, from a resiliency standpoint. For example, if you're a semi-chip manufacturer, they have a ton of equipment. Those equipments have to be, those lines need to be re-cleaned out, chemicals need to be removed, the bad product that was in the line that was during the outage is all bad equipment, bad product, all goes to waste. All goes to waste. One power bump for a chip manufacturer I looked at in Canby, Washington, Washington, what's called small little town outside of Washington, up north. Every power bump that they have, and a power bump essentially it's like you have a load like this and it kind of dips for a second, just a small little bump maybe, and it could be for a variety of reasons. I mean, who knows what it could be, but they happen sometimes. It's between about $300 to $1 million for every time that thing happens, because you have to shut down all the machines, clean them all out, reset all the machines. All that labor, even if they're sitting around, they're still union, they're still being paid for. And you have to pay overtime even for a lot of them. So it can be very, very costly. So they're like, what do? Well, we buy more diesel generators to back ourselves up, make sure we don't have power. But that doesn't always solve the problem either, because diesel generators take a while to get up, to ramp up, right? I mean, so how do you create the right infrastructure for that? And a lot of new developments, new buildings are big into doing microgrids and renewables. The cannabis industry is very big into that because they have a whole set of issues because they're so power intensive. The utilities cannot supply them all the load that they need. So they're coming to people like myself saying, help me, what do I need to do to make sure that I can have my facility running at full capacity, and I can grow as much as I can possibly grow. So I mean, from the public standpoint, I'll give you an example. I'm working with Native American tribes. The biggest factor is a couple-fold. When you talk about Native American tribes, they're not all wealthy casino owners like people think. There are a lot of low to moderate income families in those environments, and the value add there and the benefit to them is, first of all, it aligns well with their mission statement, which is essentially being independent and living off the land. Currently, most tribes are grid tied, usually in remote locations, so the power quality is very low. If the remote locations or the reservations are, building transmission lines out there are very expensive, and the cost of power tends to be typically higher in those locations where they're located at. Not always, but typically they are. So in a microgrid application, one benefit is health. You're surrounding yourself with energy generation assets that are going to be better for the overall environment. So air quality is a huge topic. That's number one. Number two is talking about transmission of power, and where does that power come from? It's come from coal facilities like they come before. What's the negative print on the planet in that aspect? That's kind of a big topic of concern. But then also in some models what we're doing is that we're allowing equity ownership for these low to moderate income families. So renewable energy should not be accessible only to those who are the wealthier class, or it should be accessible to all parties. Ownership of these facilities also, in my opinion, should be accessible to all classes. So what we're doing is we're allowing some of these low to moderate income families to be able to put in, let's say, $10 a month or $20 a month, whatever it may be, into this. And so wherever, as the business grows, that model grows, people can have some small ownership of that microgrid, which in turn allows them to get some returns off that. So we use that as an economic tool to try to raise them up with an economic class and give them an opportunity to have some ownership. But the educational aspect is really important, because I think if we really want to take care of our planet, and I think we need people to understand what does it mean. First of all, what does it mean to be living in an environment that's either net zero, off grid, or solely powered by renewables? The other aspect that we need to educate people is what their current behaviors today are affecting the planet in the long run. For example, recycling, right? I mean, in a microgrid, we can look at biomethane digesters, we can look at recapturing ag waste, there's so many things that you could potentially do that becomes less wasteful of a society. Does that make sense, right?
Yeah.
So those are kind of the primary benefits that we kind of assess. The other aspect of it too is the more people understand renewables, the more people will adopt it and grow them, which will be better off for everybody. Education is the primary factor behind that. If you go to most colleges today, like you go to OSU, for example, you will find very few, if any, students who want to study and learn the current grid. Most of the people who are out there, new generation, learning about renewable energy. Why? because that's really, the evolution has already happened. It's already happening today. The cost of doing, the coal industry did not die because it got banned per se. I mean, it partially did, but a real big factor is that the cost of renewable energy has dropped so much to compete with coal power. That is a part of the evolution where society has pushed it, and how did it get to that point? Think about, how does solar go from where it was years and years ago to where it is today, is through education. Education creates demand. If you don't know about it, if you don't understand it, you don't want it. The more you do know about it, the more you understand it, the more that you do want it, because you understand the values and the benefits of that. So in the microgrids, a lot of parts that we're doing for community benefits are that we always sort of an educational component around that, because we want people to be able to live and immerse themselves in a microgrids environment and be able to have hands-on experiences to be able to say, oh, well, I get it, this is tied to here, this is tied to there, this is how it's being managed, and this is how much reduction of our print that we're having on the planet, is there a carbon credit opportunity there, which is developing right now very slowly. There is tremendous ways for people to benefit spiritually, financially, and educationally through renewable energy. I won't say just microgrids, but just being a part of the renewable energy sector. That's why even Lane Community Colleges got a great solar program. They don't have a great grid program, right? And if you go to industry trade shows today and you go to talking about substations or utilities or whatever else may be, the average age that you'll see today at these events and these shows are right around 50, just between 50 to 70 on average. You find very few young people in that, because most young people today who grew up in another generation of new technology understand renewables and the importance of that. So the community aspect is important.
Sorry.
No worries.
Now I'm worried about this. Okay, so sound's still going. Today, community, very important. Community aspect. Oh, is that not? Did it stop?
Yeah, it stopped too. Now it's going. It said it automatically stopped.
I bought some new batteries for these things, and they were the cheap kind, and that's what happens.
It's okay.
It's a big parallel to what's going on now.
Yeah, cut and paste if you need to, and we can always go over these topics again later, so don't worry, that's fine. Just use what you can use today. But overall, I think, communities benefit because we have to become a society where we become less reliant on a larger scale society. I don't mean that in a negative way, but we need to support local, grow local, and pull local, meaning that everything that we do is to really help benefit our local community. And we're talking about how can we do that without relying on the Bonneville power dam, hundreds of miles away up the river to be transmitted down to us here in Eugene. How we just create our own power within Eugene for our own community to serve our own people. I think that from an economic standpoint, that's really important. For society standpoint, it's really important, and the monies will stay locally to support local businesses and local communities, to support local programs. So the more that we can become self-reliant, we start pocketing ourselves in those ways, I think that we as a society can become more independent and more free thinking, rather than relying on, say, federal regulations coming down and blocking something, right? Those are negative impacts that we all get very dismayed about. I'm going off topic, but in a microgrid, in a sense, it allows you the ability to do that. And a good example of this, and we'll talk about projects in Africa, there are communities that have very archaic political structures, right? Let's just say there are chiefs or kings of villages or tribes. There's no economic development opportunity out there, right? Because there's no business that wants to say, I'm going to move to this area and serve these little tribal communities. This happens even in Alaska with our own states here. But the moment that you can set these villages to become independent and sovereign and not rely on some foreign entity to come in and try to gouge them for power pricing, all of a sudden to say, oh, we're going to generate our own power for this our own community. There's the whole village would come and want to learn and understand what's going on. That's how important it is. Those kids who grew up in that will understand and learn how it goes on, and they will evolve that model. more and more. So, and then it gives them some basic needs, because again, you're talking about basic lights. Well, what do lights do? Lights provide education opportunities, right? You can't study and do homework in darkness, for example. So then you're talking about, well, I have this, I can use power tools to fix cars, if we have cars, or fix bicycles, or maybe you're advancing the technology of those areas to bring them out of poverty, or bring them out of environment, give them opportunities to be able to build all new ideas, all new structures. But you always need basic infrastructure no matter what. You always need water, you always need power. If you got those two things, a community will thrive, or it can thrive, it will grow, I put it that way. And I use a very simple analogy, is that we're all organic elements, we're all like plants. There are very, very few plants in this world that can survive without energy and water, right? And we get the energy from the sun. So, if you have a lot of water, that's great. But if you don't have any energy or sun per se, it's a very different world. So those why we need to have those basic elements in place, and then and only then do most plants flower. And flower is where we start to seed and spread and grow, right? I use that analogy just because I want you to understand the simplicity of a basic need. Energy should not be something that is a high-tech element. It should be a basic need for everybody. And I mean, that again, so imagine a small solar panel can charge a cell phone.
This is perfect, and my camera is trying to ruin this moment.
All right.
Basic needs. Okay.
But basically it's like a cell phone. If one person in the village has a cell phone, that person has an advantage over other people in the same village. Economic opportunities, connectivity, that's really where it's key, right? So connectivity to the outside beyond their village, or to their neighboring village, is a huge part, because that's how you do trade, and maybe trade quicker, right? So you kind of sound just kind of some low, very simple levels of what we can do. And like I said, having this cell tower is a huge deal. So just again, basic simple needs can provide a lot more opportunities for communities to help them better their own community. And as they do that, they start to expand out, they start to have better communities around them. And then you start to have this process going on. So in reality, I kind of use, the analogy as I'm like Johnny Appleseed. I'm going throwing out there like as many seeds as I can and get as many projects as I can from microgrids, because when people see that and they see what's happening, that's education. That's adopting, saying, oh, well, this company could do it over here, or this community did it over here, or this campus did it over here. We know that we can do it. How do we do that? They want to learn and know. And that's where people like me get to come in and be able to educate and say, here's some of the great opportunities, here's some of your barriers. It's going to be a partnership process to handle this entire project. It's a large project, and how do we approach it in the most effective, efficient manner. And that's really where I get excited and jazzed about it, is just to be a part of that potential project. And again, I'm a father, so it's kind of like, it's kind of my little baby, kind of get to watch it grow and build it, and then kind of, as well, you kind of set it free and see how it does. And that's the beauty of what we get to do, and using technologies that we have today, and that in a way that makes financial sense, which it didn't years ago, because battery storage was so expensive, and solar was too, but nowadays it does. So hopefully it kind of encapsulates your whole community aspect.
It does. The camera is messing with me today, but I know I captured it, what I needed to.
No. You
You got a grant a couple years ago to help with some emergency structures around here.
Mm-hmm.
What were they?
It's for eWeb with their headquarters,
Water and
the water intake, and a communication tower, which is their, tying back to your community aspect. That's another benefit to the community, is critical infrastructure. eWeb is looking at doing a microgrid. Well, they are looking at doing a microgrid for those three facilities, because eWeb says if they have no power at their own headquarters, they can't dispatch emergency services in the event of a power outage properly. They have some backup, but they really want to be more resilient and utilize more renewables. The communication tower is a critical communication tower, because it not only serves this eWeb, but it serves other local agencies in an area provide services, which would be critically important to have a communication channel, which is kind of what I said before about the villages, right? This, for them, it's for how to dispatch emergency services to where and to why. And then the water intake is hugely important, because if you don't have water coming into a community, water is a critical need for all human life, or all life in general. And not only that, but if there's no water being pumped through and water sources not being kept, there's no pressure kept in the system, your toilets could essentially back up. And if you had backup in every house in Eugene, that'd be a very messy problem to have, right?
Yeah.
So those are critical infrastructure, and those serve the community. So those stakeholders really is the community. That's who is the most important. Is making sure the community is the most resilient and up and running in the most critical time. Other stakeholders, again, business owners, as in the political field and the utility field, and the utilities were very negative about microgrids when I first started talking about it. They said it would never happen, and good luck, and we're not ready for that. But now they start to research it more, understand it more. It took me a long time with Yuen. I was able to get them on board, and we applied for this grant together, and we won this, helped them win this grant with San Diego National Labs and the Department of Energy. That was important because it's important for a couple of reasons. One reason is that the utility came around to understand that their current business model and current infrastructure was becoming out of date, and they needed to change, because microgrids could disrupt their business model, and it will, and it has, and it will continue to do so. So what happens is when the utilities all say, okay, wait, this threat to our business model is fairly credible, we want to make sure that we can pivot and adopt in the right way and fold it into our business model without affecting our revenue, our bottom line. Utilities are starting to adopt that more. That's why one of our largest clients is Duke Energy, one of the largest utilities in North America, and they understand the importance of this and microgrids and renewables, and they essentially have made a very, very strong effort to change their entire business model, and they're focusing on the next 20 years will be all microgrids, because they see that coming down the pipe, and they want to be a part of the evolution rather than fight the evolution of the grid, which is really critical. So in that case, the stakeholders is the community and utilities. From a state policy standpoint and a federal policy standpoint, from a federal policy in our current administration, it's fair to say that they're not highly strong on renewables, and they want to try to revitalize the coal industry, but it's not a political factor that will change the coal industry. It's an economic factor, and the coal industry cannot compete with renewables any longer, as I mentioned before. As a state level, though, when the whole factor of renewables came down from the federal level about renewable energy and how it's going to work out, the local governor, Governor K. Brown, took a stance and essentially said, well, listen, this is a state-by-state initiative, state-by-state policy, which I think the feds also understood that. And essentially Governor Brown said, we're not going to change our stance on renewables, and we have our goal, which I don't know if you saw, but a couple of days ago, Portland announced that by 2050, they'll be 100% renewable.
Oh, no, I didn't see
Yeah,
that.
so the city of Portland just announced, and I've been tracking this for a while, I knew it was going to happen, but they formally announced by 2050, the entire city of Portland will be all renewable energy.
It could be so much more before then, but I'm glad that they did that.
Right. I mean, at least it's an initiative. Well, the governor kind of already said, well, we're going to do all renewables and no coal by 2025, right? So there's no coal and we're all renewables. So the state of Oregon is taking a really strong push on renewables. Now, what does that mean, though? And there's a surface level which we all think is great, which I don't disagree. It is great. But you also have to remember, though, that by the definition of renewable energy, the state of Oregon still considers hydro renewable energy. Is hydro considered renewable or not is another whole different topic, right?
Well, the state of so who is the state of Oregon? Because that's a part of the policy, is that there are things right now that are considered renewable that aren't, and What's that involved in?
Well, this is a whole different tangent, but I mean, renewables right now, I believe, still considered is solar, solar storage, natural gas, hydro is a part of that too, still. And I'm not bunking or being negative about it. I'm just saying that it depends on your definition. To be honest with you, I could go down and someone here in this building and talk about solar panels, and then someone will argue with me that solar panels are not renewable because how damaging they are to the environment, right? Which again is another topic. I don't disagree with that. I will say that there is a negative impact of creating solar panels, but that negative impact today, the long-term impact of the future, you kind of got to weigh that out, right? And my opinion is I think that the negative impact today for the long term of the what it provides outweighs the negative. So the positive
It's
is
a good
negative.
first step, you would say.
Yeah.
In a way.
So I think the policy though is a good first step and first initiative. I think that's an important first step and first initiative. California is making that push again, saying they're going to go all renewables. Washington's going to go all renewables. There was legislation being drafted last year that I was involved with that there are a couple of senators from Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, a couple on the East Coast, all pushing for microgrids to be, for a bill to be passed to adopt and support more microgrids. The bill didn't pass. There's a good reason why that didn't pass, to be honest with you. It's because of the risk. It's lack of education and understanding. Like you try to tell what a microgrid is and you try to push the bill through, it doesn't push. The same thing happened with solar years ago. The solar movement to get that adopted and to create federal and state tax incentives around solar panels for renewable energy, it was a monstrosity of an event. I mean, it was very difficult to do. And then you're talking about microgrids, which now you're talking in more renewables, and most of these politicians don't want to learn and adopt that because they're not focusing on what's 10, 20 years on the road. They're focusing on how do I get my seat in 1 year down the road, so they're not seeing this far, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's great over here, but really it's here. And unless the constituents, unless their local communities are demanding it, requesting it, the politicians in the political level are not supporting it. Does that make sense, right? There's no gain for them to do that because they're focused on, well, I live in a rural area and I want to create more jobs here. I don't want to sit there and talk about how renewable energy can help my community because that's out of my scope of work. I want to focus on what I know today, and I'll make sure I keep my focus on what my voters want me to focus on to make sure that I'm reelected or I can continue my position. So that's why I kind of say that the educational component and getting more projects is so key, is because more people see it, they hear about it, they want to learn more about it. The more the community understands it, the more they want to adopt it. The more they want to adopt it, the policies have to be there to support it. I can go to Energy Trust of Oregon and talk about microgrids, but they said, well, we can't fund into feasibility because their funding comes from the state level, right? And they don't understand microgrids, but they can fund solar or energy efficiency, but they don't do microgrids, for example. And that's going to take time. Again, it's part of the evolution. It's just like years ago in the telephone industry, no one thought of what a cell tower was, right? But then the more you understand it, the more you can require it, it all makes sense. And so it just takes a lot of pushing the dirt, really to make that happen. And the best people to shove it is all of us, individually and collectively together, saying, we want this, we need this, we know it can work today. Why are we not doing this today? And that's what's going to push that drive, and start asking your local governments, why don't we have this here? We can do this. And that's what I've been doing. I'm working with municipalities and take care of critical infrastructure, for example, or showing how municipalities can actually either save more money or make more money, by utilizing new technologies. Don't get stuck in the old archaic ways. If you don't evolve your business model will die. It's very simple. So we'll talk about software and microgrids, and I'll talk about their platforms. So the last couple of years, Green Energy Corp was started because we understood that the grid was as smart as it was going to get, So this whole idea of smart grid or smart city is about as smart as it's going to get, and then people are going to want to have a microgrid application to serve the local areas rather than run on a larger grid. So in doing that, the CEO of the company has known a lot of different vendors and technologies, and everyone had their own proprietary solution, their own proprietary code. So for example, if you had a General Electric substation, they only updated the software as often as they wanted to, which could have been every 5, 10 years, who knows how long, and made it vulnerable to attacks, number one. And the other aspect of it is that it made it vulnerable to that you couldn't scale. So if you wanted to expand on that, you had to use GE approved product, for example. So you were stuck. You were married to GE for the next 20 years. It's like a microgrid, the same thing. If you go to GE and do a microgrid, they're going to sell you all GE product, and then you get GE software. And now you are called, we call vendor locked. You're essentially married to GE for the next 20 years, or however long your agreement is, maybe, or you're stuck with their equipment, for example. So Green Energy Corp developed what we call the Green Bus platform, the Green Bus software platform, which is really talking about we are open source, so we rely heavily on the software community rather than one entity, one company. And then that allows us to talk with multiple vendors and saying, what is your code that you're using for your software? We can integrate it in so that all of our projects are product agnostic, meaning we're not going to be married to one company. So if we do a microgrid, we can use a GE solar, and then maybe we can use ABB battery, or we can use whoever company's technologies that are willing to go into our project with us on an open source platform. Our open source software is able to control and manage a microgrid. And that's really important because I like to use the analogy that we're the conductor of an orchestra. We have different assets or instruments out in the field, and then our software helps control and synchronize everything. And essentially, it came off of what we call a Modbus platform, but the Green Bus idea is that it's a communication protocol between assets in real time for efficiency and effectiveness. With that being said, the last 2 years, what we've done now is that we worked with Duke Energy and found what we call OpenFMB, which is called Open Field Messaging Bus. Open Field Messaging Bus allows us to support and adopt a plug-and-play environment. For example, when you do a microgrid, you had to create user software and create a custom solution to tie in this company's panels and this company's storage and this company's inverters. Maybe it's a custom software solution depending on the size and the scale of what you're using. That can be very expensive, very costly, and very time consuming. What the utilities realize and Duke Energy realize, and we realize as well, is that in order for microgrids to scale, and from a general market standpoint, as well as from a particular project, let's say you want to make your microgrid here larger, because you have a larger load all of a sudden. In order for them to scale, you have to have a plug and play. So the OpenFMB, which we co-founded, has been adopted by the North American Energy Standards Board and the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel, which are two very high-level agencies as far as standards in the energy sector. And what that does is my analogy is your laptop. So you have a laptop, and then all of a sudden you want to go out there and buy a new mouse, a keyboard, a USB drive, a webcam, whatever it may be. How do they all connect? They all connect through one standard. That standard is the USB, right? So all the vendors all of a sudden got the standard and said, okay, from a standard standpoint, we're going to utilize this piece of hardware and this code called USB to connect to our computers or our laptops. What we essentially have done in the industry is that we've now created a standard called OpenFMB, which is the code that, hey, if this camera, this mic, my cell phone, laptop are all OpenFMB compliant, means it's already built into the product as a standard. I know that these two can communicate right away with essentially me pushing a button. Another good example of the standard is Bluetooth, right? Well, devices have Bluetooth, you push Bluetooth, turn it on, they sync and they pair, and they can speak to each other. All of a sudden, they speak the same code, same language. Essentially, that's what OpenFMB is. That's essentially the standard that we've developed now, and that is among renewable energy assets. Same concept. So that's really what we have done. It's important because now, rather than me trying to figure out a USB network to hold 2 cameras, I can use the same software and do 100 cameras within a matter of seconds. All I gotta do is turn them on, right? It's like, again, like Bluetooth. You have one system and say, well, I want to connect to 10 devices rather than 20 devices rather than just 1 or 2. That standard helps you scale quick, or in the old days, you'd have to create a code for every little unit that you were attaching on. That's why it's a big deal. So that's really what we've been pushing on. That's kind of really what Clean Energy Corp, Green Bus / Open FMB was really about and what it kind of evolved into. So I'm not a software engineer or electrical engineer, but that's what makes us special, and that's why it's important, is because, again, we're allowing that independence to be there. You don't have to be married to one entity like a General Electric or whoever it may be. It allows you to be independent and be able to try new technologies, which is important because it allows us to future-proof. Because, for example, a solar panel of this table will produce X today. 5 years on the road, it might produce 5X. And economics says, well, look, the same footprint, I can produce 5 times the power. I want to switch this panel out. Now, again, if you're vendor locked, you can't. You can't call up G and say, I want this new technology. And G's like, well, I don't. That's not our contract. That's not our deal. And our platform, the microgrid platform, using the plug and play, we can say, okay, the economics makes sense. We contact that vendor, create the little code to connect the two together. Not that difficult to do. And boom, all of a sudden you have this next panel on, and it improves your resiliency, increases your production, which is increases your economics. And so if it financially makes sense for a project, then that's what we'll do. So that's kind of why it's important that we are essentially on a software platform that is always cutting edge, because it's always constantly evolving in the open source world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Or do you have any final words that you'd like to say about?
I mean, no. I mean, I think overall, I think just people having an open mind and really wanting to learn more and understand more about how, not just about microgrids, but how we can be independent, and we can be self-reliant, and we choose to create our own destiny rather than be at the whim of governments. And we just have to have a collective society rather than a disenfranchised or separated society, so to say. But energy is a key binding element for any community of any size, and this is just kind of one of the ways that how we're approaching it. That's about it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we can. There is a science to health, and for some reason right now nobody's listening.
Well, it's unfortunately because people think science is bunk until you have cancer and you want to try any technology, anything out there.
And finally they accept cannabis.
But until then, who knows, right? So, I mean, that's the problem is that we tend to reach out to technology in a time of crisis, in a time of need, rather than having the foresight to plan ahead and prepare for that. It's like the whole Cascadia effect is the same thing.